Now that Laravel's been set up in your development environment, let's take a look at what all is in there and how we can start building our app in this framework. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my text editor, and I'm going to open the location where I installed it. I installed it in the sandbox directory in my documents. Yours will likely be somewhere else. You can go ahead and open the root folder so we can see everything that's there. And you can see there's a lot of things like the server.php, composer.json that are really just part of the Laravel installation. The app directory is where the meat of your application lies, and we'll look in here a bit later. Bootstrap is a directory that contains a few files that bootstrap the framework and configure autoloading. The public directory contains the front controller as well as your assets. And the vendor directory contains your composer dependencies. You can see there are a number of other different classes here. If you remember, Laravel uses a lot of things from Symfony as well as other places. This is one of the reasons that Symfony is such a robust development environment, because they don't have to start everything from scratch. They simply borrow from other places and then add a front layer onto it. Let's go ahead and open the app directory and see what's inside. The config directory is going to have, as you might guess, a lot of the configuration settings for your Laravel application. There's a lot you can do in the configuration. The controllers will contain all of your controllers. You can see I have a home controller here. And inside we'll have our actions, and we'll look at how we do controllers and routing in a minute here. Database is going to contain all of your database migration and seed models. Models will contain the model layer of your database, and this is what will work with Eloquent ORM. One of the things about Blade is it will actually pre-compile your templates. So if you go into storage, this will be all of the templates compiled. Additionally, there will be other things in there, including session information and caching. Commands is another important directory. This is where you can put commands that will be run. Some of these can be queued by your application as well. Let's take a look at how Laravel handles routing. Let's go into the routes PHP. Now you can see here, I'm using this route class, and I'm calling the get function. Now, here's one of the nice things about PHP, if you're familiar with working with JavaScript, is they use a lot of closures. What this means is that you're able to essentially embed functions inside of function calls. So that way, I don't always have to refer to external files. This can allow a shorthand of doing things that usually you'd have to create an additional file for and create a function inside of. So you can see here, I'm passing the function, and inside that function, I'm returning view make hello. This will then essentially make that view and type out hello. This view make will actually open this hello PHP, and this will be what gets returned. This is exactly the code that we saw on our default homepage. So that's essentially how it's working. It's simply returning it, and it's passing the URL root as the first argument of the function. You could have other things in here as well. For example, I could put root, put, and then whatever my particular URL root is going to be, foo bar, we'll use that as an example, and type in function, and then use your own closure right here to return whatever you'd like to do. So you can see this can be extremely simple. And in your return, or in this function, you could actually pass things that refer to other classes if you'd like. Let's take a look at our controller. Here's our home controller. The show welcome, return view make hello. Notice how it defines up in the comments how you could set this up into your routing. It's setting root get, and then it's going to home controller at show welcome. So that's another way you can do things in your routes, is you can essentially, instead of returning it directly here as an enclosure, you can pass the name of the controller, the @ sign, and then the function that you want to call or the action inside of that controller. The next thing to look at is how Laravel handles views. This particular view that we looked at is just returning straight PHP. However, Laravel supports using templates. Laravel uses the Blade template engine. And if you look at the documents at laravel.com docs in the whatever version you're currently using, the version we're using here is 4.2/templates, it will give you information about just exactly how Blade works. The main thing to remember is you can use the @ symbol to do things like extend other layouts, add sections of content or sidebars or navigation, whatever you want. It's a fairly simple and straightforward element. It also allows you to use these curly braces to output dynamic variables. It's a fairly simple, yet at the same time powerful way to write quick code. One other quick thing to mention is the way that it handles responses. There's a special response class, and from this class, you can do things like redirects. So if instead of returning a controller and an action or a view, you could actually redirect to, say, a login. All of the information on how this works is also available in the laravel.com documentation. The last thing I want to go over is how you might use Artisan to do some code generation. We looked earlier at all of the options available inside of Artisan, and there are a number of things you can do. One of the things you can do is to create a controller. So let's say I wanted to create a controller. I could type in PHP artisan controller:make. This particular command will allow us to make a new controller. And then after this, you define what the name of your controller is. Make sure that you're in the directory of your Laravel project before you type in these commands. I'll just call this something like Drew controller. So it's created our controller. And let's go ahead and go into our code and have a look at what got created. In our controllers directory, there is now a Drew controller PHP. And you can see it creates an index action, a create action, a show action, an edit action, an update action, and a destroy action. So this is a REST-ready controller. So I could easily write whatever functionality I need to do inside of each of these actions that are created by default. If you want to add this into your routes, you can use a special route command called resource. You assign the directory name, and then you assign the controller. Because it's REST aware, this will essentially then allow you to handle all of those actions in a REST-like fashion. So you can really see the advantages and differences of Laravel in these examples. Because they use these closures, it's much more like JavaScript and allows for shortcuts when you need them, but the ability to break it up and spread it out when you want to do that as well. Interested in learning more? Let's discuss where to look next to find out more about Laravel.